Welcome to the Evolving Spiritual Practice podcast in association with bodyheartmindspirit.co.uk. In this episode, I talked to Ben Calde about integrated health. Ben is the founder and primary practitioner at the Centre for Integral Health in the town of Shrewsbury in England, where he helps clients with kinesiology, Bowen technique, access bars, nutrition advice, NLP, Qigong, allergy testing, meditation and McLaughlin scar tissue release. We talk about how to approach integrating the health of our body, heart, mind and spirit. Ben has been practicing Qigong for 30 years, is a long-time meditator and has been a professional kinesiologist for 18 years. In this conversation, we focus in particular on nutrition, epigenetics, the relationship between the practitioner and client, the importance of flow, how spiritual bypassing can ignore health issues, and how to stay sane and healthy during coronavirus lockdowns. Ben Calde, welcome to the Evolving Spiritual Practice podcast / Body, Heart, Mind, Spirit YouTube channel. Definitely be appearing on both of those platforms. And I wanted to talk to you today about an integrated, holistic, multidisciplinary approach to health. And that's your wheelhouse. I believe that's the expression. It's funny how you pick up these expressions. I don't even know what the hell that means. It's just what I hear out there. That's your neck of the woods, your domain. I was just, been on your website. Well, you should say we met. We probably haven't seen each other for quite a few years, but we did some workshops together around this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I'll get you to tell the story, but you set up an actual centre, basically with this multidisciplinary, integrated, holistic approach to health. And I've been looking on your website. It looks like even though the centre is closed because of COVID.
We're open again now. We managed to reopen in December, and then we after a little bit of toing and froing in January after the new set of guidelines that came out, we closed for just over a week, and then we're reopen again now. So, but under very specific conditions. But
that's good.
But hi as well, Ralph. It's nice to be here with you as well. It seems like it's been a long time since you and I had a conversation, and certainly lots of things have taken place there. So it's a real pleasure for me to be here with you and to be invited into the podcast. Thank you.
How would you define the core principles of integrated health?
It's a really interesting one for me, even from a historical point of view. As we record this now here at the beginning of February, I am literally about to have my 18th anniversary working professionally as a kinesiologist, which is my kind of primary background, which has led me into such a multidisciplinary work, and saw how, I guess, from that integral point of view, the pluralistic apprenticeship that I'd had into holistic health, and a lot of horizontal development at that point, and then being introduced to the integral model in kind of 2010, 2011, and how that really helped my thinking evolved. As a natural part of being a practitioner of complementary medicine here in the UK, we have continued professional development requirements for our insurance and our professional associations. So I'd always been in this process of kind of choosing, what else do I think I need to know? What else interests me about about health that I feel like I'm getting stuck with my clients, and that if I had more information, I could do something with. So I would wander off into these various areas and do stuff because it interested me. And I'd had clients that said, well, I'm struggling with this. What do we do with it? And so when I got introduced into integral theory, it suddenly gave me this beautiful holding frame of, this is what you're doing, this is why you're choosing these different parts. And and so we have this beautiful aspect of the four quadrants, the four basic dimensions in integral. So we have our mind, our body, our culture, which I tend to distill partly into relationships and then into the environment. And I love the way that both Ken Wilber and Martin Uchik have described what we do as development of body, mind, and spirit in all ways of truth, beauty, goodness, and function. So that development of an increased amount of truth, beauty, goodness, and function really is what I use as, why am I trying to do what I'm doing with people when they arrive with me and we look at their requirements. I'm trying to understand, where do they require more truth, beauty, goodness, and function? What is it that's lacking? Are we talking about something that's a dimension primarily controlled by the mind, or by something going on with the body, or by something going on with the relationships and the culture that they're in, or is it something environmental? And so those tend to be the spaces that I begin in and look for the gaps, essentially. Where is this person already doing well with something? Where are they not doing so well? And where are they pathological, or where are their real problems? And what can we do to easily start affecting those and changing those in easy degrees as well? Sometimes we look too much for the thing that needs the sledgehammer, without realizing that the little adjustments that we could make probably will need us not needing a sledgehammer later on. So and developing something within the capacity of each client that I work with. So I guess that would be my key: goodness, truth, beauty, and function.
Yeah. So in a way, you're. This isn't. The podcast and YouTube channel that I do is not specifically to do with integral theory and work of Ken Wilber, although that does feature, has been a massive influence on my life.
Yeah.
I do think it's a map that says on the map is not the territory, but I do think people that get into the integral theory forget that.
Definitely.
And start thinking that the map's like a complete description of reality and all of that stuff. And I certainly been through that phase a few years ago, and kind of woken up out of that dream, with a bit of a hangover.
Sure.
Reality is ultimately mysterious, and we've got these kind of. It's a bit like we can get people onto the moon using mathematical equations and technology, but so much of the process of getting someone onto the moon, we don't understand all the workings of it. I mean, you can use a piece of equipment that works, but you can't explain every single aspect of it.
Sure.
And so you need to know enough. So I mean, this, how this applies to health is that there are things that work, and they've been proven to work over a very long time, often hundreds of years. And sometimes you'll never get to the bottom of actually understanding why it works. Yeah. I mean, one example of that is consciousness is a great mystery, and the interaction of consciousness and matter, and even if those two things are separate things or separable, whatever. So there's this balance between using really useful maps that actually make change happen, and if you're applying that to health, it makes good health happen. But there is also, you're holding it lightly enough that ultimately this is all quite mysterious, and keeping your ears open for new maps that can be either plugged into the map you're using, or they're subsidiary, or you can do it alongside. So it's. I think one of the things that's really great about this holistic, multidisciplinary, integrated approach is that you're kind of open to all of these angles, and you're trying to keep your ears open. You're bringing them all together and seeing how they work in a synergy. And it's a reaction against this kind of panacea. One method approach, that's the panacea which sorts everything out, and we all know that actually doesn't work. There's no panacea, and I'm always falling for the trap myself. I've got to be honest about that. I always find the thing that I think, oh, there we go, that's it, and then it's not. It's just part of this mesh.
But you and I have been, kind of exploring various aspects of consciousness, of development, of life, both of us for decades now. So thankfully, I think we get to that point of maturity where when we do get those things that seem super vital and super potent, we can have that excitement of them for the moment, but we can also remember that they still are part of what fits into the bigger whole, as it were. And I like the integral framework because it gives me a guiding orientation. So it just helps me to remember to look at various parts of what's going on. And yeah, every person that steps into a room with me to work with me for whatever reason, and those reasons can be so varied. I mean, I think somewhere now in the region of about 17,000 clinical hours of practice. And so, yeah, I mean, it's been a very full-time career. And so I've seen so many things that there's a part of me now that knows there is no one thing. That there is only the unique journey of the individual. And for one person the necessity might be something in nutrition, for another in relationships, for another it might be in the way that they're framing the world, for another it might be that if they got rid of all the clutter out of their bedroom and reorientated the bed so they woke up facing the sunrise, it would change their lives. And sometimes the details that make the difference, I've found, can be so obscure and so random and so unique that they're only going to work for that individual, because that's part of their ritual, their process of transformation. And I think that we all have a buy-in to a degree. And the more that we have a buy-in with the system that we choose to work with, however that works, the more likelihood we are to create a change up to a point. Because that part of us that is then placebo-driven, the part of us that is reacting because we like that, is going to respond better. And so, I couldn't ever tell you that there is a procedure for asthmatics, or there is a procedure for people that have allergies, or there's a procedure for people that have confidence, because my experience of working with thousands of individuals within all of these different frames is that every one of them was unique. And that's what makes my work so alive for me, is that I don't actually know where I'm going when somebody steps into a room with me. We will start, as you and I are, we'll ask some questions and we'll explore and start to build up a picture. And sometimes it's only as that relationship evolves over a series of sessions that person actually knows what they're really trying to do in the first place. It might not be anything to do with what brought them to me.
Yeah, it's really of the moment, this bespoke, unique, individualized approach to health and medicine and everything. I mean, we do Airbnb at our house, and we've got a bus. We've got a few things, but one of them is a bus and it's, there's nothing else like, it's a one, and it's a unique bus. There's probably not another one like it in the world. People come that, and that they like that, and that's very, very popular. Versus a Holiday Inn or something like that. I mean, I'm not saying Holiday Inns don't have their place, but it's a bit, our approach to medicine and health is kind of, it's all tied up with postmodernism and that the rise of postmodernism culturally, and the importance of the individual, and not the cookie cutter approach. So it's quite a departure from the production line approach of, this just take this, next person just take this. I mean, it's a bit like with psychotherapy, just prescribing people the similar, SSRIs, just take these, you feel better, take these. Whereas psychotherapy, for example, is a very, very, the mind is a very diverse place, and it makes me think of meditation, that it took me years of practicing meditation to find the type of meditation that really lit me up. It took about 10 years of practice. So there's no such thing as meditate. You could go to see someone, alternative health practitioner, they say, well, I recommend you meditate. But and what do you mean by meditation? Do you mean this type of meditation, that type of meditation? And you must experiment with all of these things. Yeah. But at the same time, you need to put enough time in with each of them to actually start to get some of the benefit of it. And there's these cost to benefit analyses you always have to make when you enter any activity or health modality. And part of that lies with the practitioner who's recommending these things, but then also as a participant, you're not just a passive. Yeah. You can't be. You've got to bring yourself to. You need to make some decisions yourself. Yeah. So there's this. It's more of a mutuality model, rather than you just go sit there and the guy in the white coat tells you exactly what to do.
Yeah, and within the work that I do, relationship is key. I would be a liar if I didn't say that over the years there's been a number of people that they've come to work with me and I'm just not the right person for them. My approach and how I look at the world and the kind of things that I would expect off of them as clients, because as you mentioned, that participation, without it, what I would do with somebody would not work. I need them to buy in. I need them to take part in that process. So, as much as some of the work I do, some of the soft tissue manipulation and other work, it's relatively passive. What I do in the hour or so that I spend time with them when they come and see me is only part of what I actually require, because what they do when they go away will actually determine whether or not what I did has an effect. Mm-hmm. So there needs to be this understanding about people's roles and responsibilities in their own healing process. And I use this analogy that the reason that somebody is in the state that they are in when they arrive with me is the sum total of everything that they have and haven't done up until that moment. And the reason that it's not worse is because some of the stuff they've chosen to do has helped keep them well. And the reason it is there is because the other stuff didn't. So now what we've got to do is identify what stuff is really supporting them, what stuff isn't, and reduce the stuff that isn't and increase the stuff or include new stuff that will. And, at a simple way of looking at it, that's essentially all we're going to do. We're going to get rid of the stuff that ain't helping, and we're going to increase the stuff that is helping. And we've just got to identify what it is for an individual, what that really means for them in this time, not what it meant when they were, younger or as a child, or what it might mean for them in 10 years. And I think it's something that I think certainly within perhaps the diet industry, nutrition industry, there isn't enough discussion about the fact that, well, it's winter right now. Why would I recommend salads to you? Cold, damp food in cold British damp weather is not conducive to good health. So we actually have to have this self-awareness that allows us to adapt as we go along. And part of the process that I'm really trying to encourage with my clients over time is that they get a sense of that themselves. How does this thing sit with you? Does it feel like it works for you? If it doesn't, what would give you a better kind of sensation of success within that, so that they're not just being told that they need to do XYZ at this time each day, and that's it. And again, it's through integral that some of that scalability and some of that adaptability is really kind of I've kind of stolen that and taken that and put it into the health practice as well.
It reminds me of that saying: if you give someone a fish, you feed them for that day, but if you teach someone to fish, then they're fed for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
And when I go to see a GP, I've got my 5 minutes or 8 minutes or whatever it is with them, and they just sort of, they're doing that, giving me a fish.
Yeah.
And what you're describing is, well, I'm going to give you a fish right now, but I want, my purpose here is to make you, help you be healthy forever. And it's that, again, that takes a shift in the, as a patient, you're asking more of a patient. Which would put some patients. So, I mean, there are people that just want to be told what to do. I mean, I taught the drums for 14 years, and I would have some pupils that they would only ever do what we did in the lesson. They'd never practice. So it's like we would just be moving so slowly because it was, and then there are other students that did loads of practice, and they just made rapid growth, and it was really a really exciting journey and a wild ride, and we were doing it together. It was that feeling of we're in this together, and I'm just helping you. I'm just guiding your own innate drive to learn the drums.
And it's part of,
I think that feeds back into this integral model of health, is that you're in it together. And the other thing to mention is that as a practitioner, you're not just a brain giving them information. You do this stuff yourself. It's not, that again. So you could be a doctor. You could be the most unhealthy a GP. Really, a lot of GPs actually are very unhealthy people. And they're telling people all day how to be healthy. And there's we have this kind of instinctive bullshit detector. And as you were saying, that the rapport and relationship with the practitioner you're going to see is really key, and it actually facilitates a lot of the healing and health promotion just through that feeling of, I can trust this person, they walk their talk.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it also comes down to having realistic expectations of who it is that you go and see. I mean, certainly in the early days of my practice, and I class myself now as an integral practitioner. I used to consider myself as a holistic practitioner. And in those early days, which were embedded much more in the kind of the subtle toxicity of the kind of postmodernistic view as well, which kind of created this separation away from conventional medicine, away from that kind of doctor space. And yet really the truth is manage the expectations of what you expect out of that service. And if you understand what that service can provide, then your expectations about what you will ask for and how you will behave within it will change. And that's very much the case. I mean, I loved it there that you said, you can have a doctor who's blatantly unhealthy, and yet they'll spend their day telling people about health. And in my mind, I went, no, actually, what they'll do is they'll spend their day telling people how to arrest sickness.
Oh, okay.
And that's not the same thing.
That's true. Yeah.
There's a big difference. I mean, we can take vitamins as a really interesting example. There's a big difference between an RDA, which the recommended daily allowance is enough to stop you getting a disease of deficiency. What it doesn't do is make you healthy. To have a healthy therapeutic dose, maybe hundreds, sometimes even 1,000 times higher than an RDA. But there's a difference between not having sickness and having health. So again, it's having those relationships, managing those expectations, and really helping people understand what they're going to get if they use a service like mine in comparison to a GP's. And for some people, that's quite challenging because they don't really know how to have responsibility for themselves in that way. And so they sometimes don't like it when the answers that they get back from me are, you're going to have to choose. When you go out there, can I eat this or this? Well, you're going to have to choose, because on that day, how are you? How does that feel for your body? Does it feel like it's going to add nourishment? Does it feel like it's going to add vitality? Does it give your life a sense of richness to include that thing? And if it doesn't, probably don't have it. So it's teaching people to think differently as well, to have a different awareness, to observe themselves and the factors that influence them. So even coming back to aspects, like how our relationships influence us, like how our language influences, like how our shadow self can influence us, all of these factors have a big kind of impact on our overall health. So being able to gradually take people into those areas where they have those developmental blind spots and help them to evolve that so that ultimately they don't need me. They can go away and they can make a lot bigger choices for themselves. And don't get me wrong, if I was in a car accident or I broke my arm, I'd be down the hospital straight away. There would be no doubt about that. But once I understood what was going on and I used the service for what it is best at, I would then look at what else I needed to do from that integral framework in terms of how do I look after my mind, my body, my relationships, my environment with that injury to give me that optimal reach for health.
Thinking about diet, diet's a classic one, and I see on your website you do nutritional advice for people, and that is this really is one of those fields where people do love to bring out the one true way for all human beings in all times. So it's like veganism, full-on carnivore, vegetarian, paleo, keto. I mean, it's like body type. Well, I mean, body types are so varied across the world.
Yeah,
and it's interesting how a lot of that recommendation of the one true diet has kind of come out a bit out of this new age postmodern worldview.
Definitely.
Which is interesting because it's all about that kind of individual, everybody doing things differently, diversity, but there's this, when it comes to diet, there's this real fundamentalism, and there's I've experimented with all sorts of diets in my life, all of it. Fruitarian, high protein, macrobiotic, vegan, all sorts of things. And I've kind of landed at the end of it with the sort of just very simple, basic, balanced diet. I mean, I'm a lacto-ovo vegetarian, occasionally eat fish. Thinking of this winter, I've been eating tons of fat, loads of cheese and loads of eggs. I've wanted that, and it's felt right to do it. But when the summer comes round, I don't eat, and I've been eating quite a lot as well. And when the summer comes round, I eat much lighter meals, much more active. I'm outside. I don't really crave so much of the fat stuff. So how do you manage? So when people come to you for nutrition advice, I'm assuming you don't say, right, well, you just need to be vegan and
Never.
be healthy forever.
Not for the death of me, because again, like you, I've explored a lot of dietary approaches over the last 20 odd years. And part of how I kind of came into all of this was because initially, back in 1999, I went and saw a kinesiologist myself who identified some allergies for me. And on the basis of that, I then started getting a lot more interested in my dietary situation and how that had changed things for me. And I was already a vegetarian at that time, had been for a couple of years. And, you know, I experimented with all sorts Ayurvedic work, Chinese 5 element work, I did vegan and vegetarianism for about 12 years, but it made me sick. It couldn't be sustained. And I would say currently I'm probably 60% of my meals are vegetarian, but I don't do dairy because for me casein in cheese is the devil. It's really not a healthy thing for me. So whenever I have people come in, I do a lot of work with epigenetics. I look at what triggers genetic change within people. So I've been studying for probably, I mean, my first tuition with this guy, Chris Astle Smith, was back in 2003, 2004, so a long time ago. But over the last kind of 7 or 8 years, I spend time with him every year studying and looking at genetics and genetic signaling and various things around there, because it's an incredible topic. And there are guiding orientations within types, just as there are within most things. But again, the map is not the territory. So what we tend to do is find a guiding orientation within a person based on their genetic predisposition. We will look at things like allergies with people as well, because there's no point in making saying to somebody, okay, be a vegan, eat lots of green leafy vegetables, if they've got a congenital problem that means that they can't process pyrrole properly, which is found mainly in green leafy plants. So they're just going to suffer in that diet. So part of it is an exploration always about their energy requirements. So I tend to be quite loose. I tend to talk about, okay, the kind of the guiding orientations tend to be more towards protein rich or more away from that. So you tend to have people that are better with more kind of vegetables and carbs and less protein, and people who are better with less carbs and more protein and fat. So there's this.
I'm in that second category.
Sure.
But for many, many years, I thought the first category was the way to go for everybody.
Sure.
And I was eating that diet, lots of grains and vegetables, basically, and fruit for years. I did it for years, and just out of curiosity and open-mindedness, I started, eating more eggs and that kind of thing. I make my own kefir and those sort of things at home, and I feel and eating far less carbs, more fat, more eggs, and I've emotionally struggle with eating red meat.
Sure.
Cause I just love animals. I don't think it's evil to eat red meat at all. Yeah. But personally, I find it difficult. But that I feel so much better for eating the way I do than how I was. And it to replace, my main sort of fuel source was carbs. To replace that more with fats now, that took quite a shift, because I was brought up with the low fat thing, that fat's bad and grains are really good and whole grains and all that stuff. And it took quite a shift for me to even allow myself to eat tons of fat and not worry about getting fat. And in fact, I'm less fat than I was before.
Yeah. And this is one of the things I find really interesting. I mean, when I ended my own vegetarianism, it came from 2 years of really noticing me getting increasingly unwell, and doing everything that I had in my capacity and my knowledge to improve that as a vegetarian. So I significantly upped my fat content, my protein content from vegetable sources and so on. And that didn't do it for me, because for me, I need a certain amount of purine-rich food within the diet, and that can only be acquired through red meat. And I was really concerned, and I had several different analyses done for me to look at this, and they all came back in the same direction. And eventually I put my hands up, and it happened to be as I was going on my first trip out to Malaysia, and the previous year I'd watched parts of my family kind of tucking into some really nice local food away where we were. And because it had meat in it, and yet I was smelling it smelled great. My body was obviously literally dying for this stuff, and I was quite concerned when I brought meat back in that I just wasn't going to cope with it. And from the very moment I started eating it again, my body just went, thank you, and I just felt the surge in vitality straight away. And so now I have a moderated diet within that. But I think one of the things that is almost more important, or as important as what you eat, is where you're getting it from and what you're doing with it when you get it. So, for instance, where I am here in North Wales now, I'm just on the Cheshire Welsh border here. Literally 4.5 miles that way is the organic farm where I get some of my meat, and about 10 miles that way is the other organic farm where I get my other sources of meat. And they're all, I've been to the farms, I've spoken to the farmers, I've seen what they do. They're happy to talk you through all the processes they use and what they feel about their animals. So the investment that they put into what it is that they're growing. And those relationships change things. I've had a discussion on a number of occasions with vegans who are like, I don't want to kill anything. And I say to them, so how strict are you about organic then? And they say, well, I'm not, because it's too expensive. And I said, great, you're still paying for the death of thousands of lives, millions of lives every year then. Because not only are the people that are producing your non-organic vegetarian and vegan food using pesticides to kill insects, which are then having knock-on effects on other populations. But I mean, certainly, for instance, in Australia, lots of monoculture crops that are being grown out there under license, they have to kill game animals, because if they didn't, they'd eat the crops. So, you're still investing into those regimes because of not really understanding where your food is coming from, what you're doing with it. And then if you're buying it pre-processed, I mean, a lot of the vegan pre-processed food at the moment, to be honest, it's pointless. It's like, whatever your feelings are about McDonald's or any of the other companies, if you're buying a vegan burger off McDonald's, you're still buying a processed piece of crap. Yeah. If you're buying all these pre-prepared boxed vegan meals, a lot of the time they're so highly processed, fats and oils that will be rancid and poor quality, that actually you're not doing yourself any health favors. All you're doing is alleviating some kind of privilege guilt that you have about the fact that everything on this planet consumes everything else on this planet and will do forever.
Yeah. To live is to kill.
Yes.
It's I've heard Jeff Salzman say before that's where he feels God fucked up. Yeah, my own stance with not eating red meat is for me it's an emotional sense, a personal emotional feeling. It has nothing to do with logic or reason.
Sure.
I know that anything I eat, I'm killing something.
Yeah.
Not just, as you say, killing that plant. It's if I'm eating, my organic sprouted wheat bread, which I like to eat. That's grown in a field where, even just in the harvesting of it, tons of mice and snakes and all sorts of things get killed, and insects. So for me, it's not that kind of thing which stops me from eating meat.
And that's always to be respected with people as well, because ultimately, whatever you choose, it don't matter. Whatever you choose, everything on this planet will die, including me. It doesn't matter. And for me personally, this is part of where some of my own development has come to. Ultimately, there are a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't really matter. There's only in the moment how it matters to you. So how I choose and how I encourage people to choose is choose the best that you can for yourself, so that it comes back to that sense of, does that thing that you choose to eat offer you that sense of vitality? Is it offering you a sense of wellness? Do you feel better for doing it or not? And whatever that choice is, for some people that's grains, for some people that's dairy, for some people that's meat, for some people that's anything natural. Whatever it is, you need to go down that path in a way that works for you, which is why I don't like to be prescriptive about diets with clients that come to see me, because I'm not the one that's going to eat it. So I'm still going to encourage them not to use non-stick, not to use processed foods, to try and use the best quality ingredients that they can access wherever they are, because ultimately that is going to give them the best sense of well-being, and allowing them to choose whatever path they want to in their lives. Because ultimately, to me, it doesn't matter. As long as I can support you in getting forward or moving up or expanding or being healthier, however you want to define it, there's the success that we're going to get in the time together.
I only eat whole foods. So the food I eat is very simple. I mean, it's like, 3 or 4 ingredients. Each of those ingredients is just what it is. It's not got 20 ingredients itself. And the simpler, the older I get, the more simple the food is I eat. Partly because I have 2 young kids, and most of my time is spent being their dad. My wife and I work part-time, and we're in a phase where she's doing more work than I am, so I'm with the kids most of the time, and so I need food that's quick to prepare. There is never a long time to prepare a leisurely meal, so that makes it simple. But also, I just feel so much better for eating very simple food. My body deals with it better. So for me, that's a real that's an important thing, and what you were saying is that just feeds back into this idea, which I'm all about with all of this stuff, is that this is complicated.
Yes.
And but not complicated, it's complex or whatever. It's the ethics of eating food is complex as well. And as you say, you could take a very, very simplistic look at this food versus this food. One might seem on face value to be an ethical food product, and the other one is some barbaric, bloodthirsty thing. But actually, if you did the actual analysis, the deep analysis, going right back to the source of it, then you've actually can make the correct decision about which is the most ethical food to eat.
Sure.
And people crave simplicity. I crave. We all do. We just want life to be fucking simple, because it's so damn difficult a lot of the time. Just give me something simple. Give me something simple, like vegan is ethical and this meat eating isn't. But it's not that simple.
No, sure. And then you add into that something like, you might be eating your organic food or your vegan food, but if you're sat at a table with an alcoholic, abusive parent who's shouting at you while you eat, the effect of the food on your body is also then changed. So we always have to take it in its bigger context and understand it from the point of view of it's the sum total of everything. And that's how, even down to how I prepare it, how and where I eat it. Like, I won't sit here in front of my computer and eat a meal, because I know that what I'm digesting is not the thing on my plate. My eyes are taking in other sources of information. So even little things about how we do a thing, sometimes you don't even need to change the diet. I'd always recommend people take out the things that they know their bodies are sensitive to and don't metabolize well. But how we then take on the food, the speed at which we chew, the focus within all of that, and it's not something that's static. And what I'm hearing from you as well is that your own process has evolved evolved over time. My process has evolved over time. In 10 years, I don't know that I'm going to be eating the way I do now.
Yeah, in fact, I don't want. I am assuming in 10 years' time I'm not going to be eating what I'm eating now.
Yeah.
I almost feel I can say that as a matter of fact that
Yeah.
I'm not going to be eating the same diet in 10 years. I hope
Yeah.
I'm not.
Yeah, and even seasonally, we should be varying that. And again, this is one of the things, unfortunately, that our supermarkets have slightly derailed for us, is that we can get hold of things in virtually any season, and we don't really consider the implication of what it's taken to achieve that. I mean, I was surprised a few years ago. My partner and I, we went to visit my brother who was staying out in Portugal, and we took a 2-week vacation and ended up driving to my partner's sister's wedding in southern Spain. So we took a camper van, did a big drive, beautiful experience. And there's a part of southern Spain that has the glass houses, the grow houses in for a lot of fruit and vegetables. And I reckon there was a stretch that we drove that was nearly 100 kilometers long, and those grow houses were probably 2 kilometers wide in terms of how much they took up on the coast. It's visible from space. That's how much of that food is being grown in that way. Yeah. And so all of these factors make the difference. And again, this is this epigenetic signaling. It's kind of like, well, having eaten a strawberry in December that was grown in a glass house somewhere, the information that that's giving my body about what it ought to be doing and where it is very different than if I get the strawberries off my allotment, which is a 10-minute walk, and they're only going to be available for 1 month of the year. It's a very, very different process. And I think like you say, the complexity of the world makes it difficult to hold how much information there really is about this. And we crave that simplicity. So having, this is the diet, if we're given that, it seems to make it easier. But essentially all we're doing is pigeonholing ourselves into something that needs that ability to adapt and change over time.
Mm. So we've really gone down the rabbit hole on diet. What are the other personal practices that you do? So someone who might be listening to this or watching it, so far you're just some guy that talking about this stuff, and we've been talking about how it's important for practitioners to walk their talk. So I know there's all sorts of things you do, because I've just been on your website looking at all your bio, and also I've met you and we've talked before. So could you just lay out some of the core practices that you the mainstays of your life, the things that you've done for a long time?
Yeah, I mean that's pretty straightforward for me. I consider myself to be a fairly uncomplicated character in that way. So again, I'm going to kind of refer back to the integral framework and specifically kind of integral life practice as an idea, because that does hold how I tend to look at what I do. So there's always something for the body involved there. So diet is one. We've chewed that one quite nicely there. Movement is the other side of that. So for me, my exercise, my movement has changed and evolved a lot over the years as my age. I'm 45 now, so my process is changing as I go on. Now, for pretty much 30 years on and off, I've done a Qigong practice. So for anyone that doesn't know that, it's a little bit like Tai Chi, but a lot easier to use and is much more health focused than martial focused. So I do Qigong on a regular basis, and that might be 4, 5, 6 days a week. It might be 2, 3 days a week. It depends on my week. And then also I like to rock climb. So I go climbing. Like this winter, I've just taken back up snowboarding again, because we've managed to get some good snow around here, and as we can't travel away, so I like to snowboard. I love hill walking, mountains. So walking for me is a really important part of it. I love music and dance and live music. So I play the guitar myself, and I love hearing musicians and kind of listening to music. And also, within my relationship, actually having quality time within my relationship, and for the two of us, because again, my partner is a similar age to me, we are self-elected to not have children. That's our kind of path to walk through life. And so we make sure that we focus time to do things that bring us joy. And that might be any one of these exploratory activities. We both love being out in the hills and in nature. We love to travel and explore culture, and we both love music. So we'll make sure that we do things so we have that richness of communion with each other as well. And for the most part, those are the big things. And then the other thing is I love to study. I love to learn. I love to engage in conversation and thinking and just explore ideas. I reckon I've probably forgotten as many things as I've learned, and I'll probably end up forgetting more things than I ever learned. It's a beautiful thing just to look at the world from different perspectives and to hear about different things, which is why I like the travel as well, because of that cultural variance in there. So I like to explore all of those dimensions, really. And again, that really brings me back into body, mind, relationships, environment, making sure I'm doing a little bit of something for all these parts of myself. I do have a meditation practice as well. A lot of that will come through in my Qigong, but for myself, I tend to then have 2 meditation processes. I tend to do shikantaza, which is a Zen practice, which translates as just sitting. So for that one, I will just sit, sometimes with eyes open, sometimes with eyes closed, and I'll just sit. And as a challenge, that one for me, I was a restless child. So the challenge is actually the surrender to just being there. And it doesn't matter what my mind does. And then the other, I tend to use breathing practices, kriyas that come through Life Force Qigong, which is the system that I practice. So they're kind of guided breathing processes that I use within there as well.
Wow, that's a lot. And you've done a hell of a lot of training. I was looking at the list of all the trainings you've done. It's a very impressive list of diplomas and this and that.
Yeah. But it's exciting. This is it. We've got a world that's full of such interesting stuff. And bodies are so infinitely complex. Functional medicine and epigenetics is a big thing for me, and having studied that over the last
define epigenetics and how that applies to the work you do.
Yeah, sure. So epigenetics can be defined as that which is above genetics. So the Human Genome Project, when it finished at the end of the 90s, we had this idea that somehow human beings were going to show up as being infinitely more complex than other organisms. And yet we had relatively only a few thousand more base pairs than cabbages and flies. It was always a joke about that. And part of what was identified at that point was that during that research, they spent all their time taking everything away from around the DNA, just to look at the DNA.
Yeah.
And they forgot about how the DNA was being informed by the environment. And there are 2 kind of significant mechanisms for that. The first is from a physical matter point of view. So if I put carrots in my mouth, or I put arsenic in my mouth, or I put lead in my mouth, that will have an effect on my genetics, because my body's physical container will respond to different things in different ways. And that will trigger encoding within my DNA to respond in certain ways. So that could be either pro or anti-inflammatory, for example, if we were to look at it from just that perspective. And research that's come out in the last few years has shown that certain epigenetic traits, certain patterns in our genetics, can be retained for as much as 11 generations. So that if the stimulus from the environment comes in any time within that 11 years, it's going to re-trigger that pattern, and it would take another 11 years before that could possibly be bred out again. So, if we look maybe just into the heritage of us as 2 white English European males, there's likelihood that we would have had factors around mining and war and other things that would have come into our environment in our ancestors that we will still hold those genetic codes for now. So were the right stimulus to come in, it would express potentially that pattern, unless we had enough stuff to limit it. And the other place it does
an interesting coincidence between. So, I mean, this is there's real science here. I mean, I was listening to something about rats being smelling almonds and getting electric shock, and their descendants, never having had that stimulus applied to them, were afraid of the smell of almonds. I mean,
that's right.
But there's like an interesting coincidence between this idea and then this kind of more spiritual, perhaps new agey thing of family karmas and being passed down through generations, which to a lot of people seems a little bit woolly and fluffy, and it's always interesting when you get these kind of folky type ideas that when people start actually getting their instruments out and measuring this stuff, is there something there?
I mean, absolutely. There's no doubt about it. I mean, it's different between males and females as well. So for instance, as a pair of males, our genetics are as absolutely up to date as they can be in our sperm right at the moment that we deliver it. 30 days we can look at if we talk about kind of sperm production, roughly around a 30-day cycle. So, if I were to conceive a child now, it would hold every single trauma that's embedded in my genetics from my birth. Now, with women, it's different, because if as a mother, so let's get this right. So if as a mother, your eggs that you hold in your ovaries were actually developed while you were in your own mother's, so essentially a generation back, while they were in utero. So my mother's eggs were actually developed in my grandmother, and then that process is arrested until puberty, at which point 1 egg per month is then matured through into a usable rate. And the genetics in there are then a generation back. So the genetics that I inherited from my mum actually contained my grandmother's traumas, because it was her eggs at that point that then maturing through. And so you get all of this complexity over time. Yeah. And that's without thinking about how emotional events will also impact on our genetics. Candice Pert's work back in the 1980s, Molecules of Emotion, her kind of groundbreaking book to describe how she discovered cell receptor sites. This is the informing by our perception. So my perception of a situation is enough to change the neurotransmitter cascade through my body, which will then change what my genetic expression is in that moment. Again, it could be more pro or anti-inflammatory if we use that as a simple model.
So I heard Jordan Peterson saying something about the sort of central message of of Jesus and the Christianity was that you're going to suffer in life, and you're going to be, there's going to be Judases in your life, and you can either enter into this life voluntarily, or be dragged into it kicking and screaming. And that the archetype of Jesus is that he voluntarily took on this life of suffering. And deceit and people cheating around him, and him ultimately dying a horrible and gruesome death, and that the sort of the circuits in the brain that are operating are very, very different. So you have the same circumstance, one person, or so animal experiments, again, ethically complicated, isn't it? Yeah. But with all sorts of experiments done with animals with helplessness and all these kind of things, and the difference between this voluntarily doing things and involuntarily, and that this really gets to the core of spiritual practice, in the sense of not the kind of bypassing type of spirituality, but really going into life, which I think the Abrahamic religions have got one up on the Eastern religions in that sense, in my opinion. And yeah, so does that kind of correlate a bit with what you're saying?
Absolutely, yeah, sure. And I mean, a really easy modern example as well that kind of transfers up from that. If you take a character like Wim Hof and his ability to be able to sit in ice water because he's taught himself how to deal with the situation in a way that doesn't create him stress. So having it's part of what I've been saying as well in this kind of challenging year that we've been having with the social situation we have around us, is that if you know it's a trap, how you go into it is different. So by, and again, Genpo Roshi, who was kind of my inspiration in Zen practice, Buddhism 101. If you know that attachment is the cause of suffering, redefine how you attach. Look at how you see the world. And this is why, to a great degree, I'm not too worried about too many things. Because if I draw myself back and look at the world on a larger scale, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't. So we can adjust ourselves. And again, from an NLP point of view, we would often talk about people who are struggling with things and who are anxious about things. It's often like the thing is really close to them, like this. So they've got no distance from it, no dissociation. So we teach them to frame it in a way that makes it to look further away from them, change the volume on it, desaturate the colors in it, adjust the perception of the environment in a way that gives you a better response in your body. And if we can make that adjustment, then it makes a great difference to the outcome that we get from it. Because if I'm not worried about doing a thing, how my body behaves during that is very different than if I am worried about a thing.
So I think one of the dangers of doing lots of these practices in your life is that you can end up thinking that you're Superman. And so, we've been almost in a year of lockdowns. What are we in? Lockdown 3 now, and it's
lockdown 3.
Yeah, lockdown 3. It's been a really, really difficult year.
Yeah.
And so I live in a great circumstance. I've live in a great house. I live with my extended family. I've got lovely kids, great relationship with my wife. I eat really healthy. I work out. I meditate every day. Do done psychotherapy for years. So all of these practices. So I firing on all these cylinders, and but then I can get a bit hyper masculine about it.
Mm-hmm.
And for the last 2 to 4 weeks, I've had difficulty with my breathing. My breathing's felt like it's gone from automatic to manual. And so in the dialogue, the monologue or whatever I was having in my mind was, you're in the best circumstance to do lockdown in. And to deal with this coronavirus and all that stuff. I'm not in a vulnerable age category, or blah, blah, blah. You should not find this difficult. And so that's what I was telling myself, Yeah. But my body was saying otherwise, Yeah. So, and I was like, what the fuck is this? It's like, was my breathing wrong? And, it's like grinding my teeth at night and all these kind of things. So my body was saying, there's something up with you. And I started praying. So in my meditation practice, I sort of drop some of the usual practices I do, and really started. I've always I cycle through different meditation practices, through the week. So I've done a lot of prayer in the past, but I kind of really doubled down on it. And because I was brought up with God and Christianity and stuff, I choose to pray to the goddess. That's who I just call Life is the name of my goddess. And I just ask for help. And then the next day, it just dawned on me. It was, I mean, yeah, I could say, it kind of like the goddess spoke to me or whatever, but just two things. One was, you're just finding this really difficult. Just admit it, dude. Yeah. And I was like, you know what? Actually, I'm finding this lockdown really difficult. This whole year has been really difficult. And I do all of these Superman activities, and, I'm really healthy, and I get into all sorts of different states of consciousness with psychedelics and meditation and blah, 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 blah. But I was being crippled by just run-of-the-mill fucking anxiety about what we're going through, and all the things, lack of social connection, not seeing friends, all the kind of down-to-earth stuff, just dead simple. And of course the narrative that I was like, all this big spiritual thing, and I'm blah blah blah, trying to on the verge of some big breakthrough, and all of that was a load of shit. And the other thing that came through was, and this kind of was almost like a voice from the goddess, was make some beautiful things for me. It was like she said that to me, and came up in my meditation. So I started playing a lot more music. I play the kora. It's an African harp lute thing. My God, that helped. And it's like I was, playing this music for her, but it really helped. And flow is such an important thing for health and well-being. And there are things, and enjoyment, flow really happens when you're doing things that you enjoy. And I hadn't been playing my musical instrument, for a couple of months or something. I'd just been kind of knuckling down to doing this, doing that, being the ultimate dad and blah, 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 blah. But so the reason why I bring this up was a couple of things. One is that just because, so this is, the map's not the territory again, just because you're doing fucking Wim Hof and strength training, meditation and psychedelic, all these things, you think, right, that's it. Life's never going to get me. And then you can be, and this is where shadow work comes into it, that you can be hamstrung by some really, really basic down-to-earth stuff that you're not looking at because you think you're doing all this Superman stuff. And I think the other reason why I bring it up is that to do with this voluntary, involuntary thing too, that I was in a place where I felt I was just involuntarily being crushed by chaos. And I'd lost that responsiveness of life. Like, there's like, you're in a rapport with life. It's like I was just doing my stuff, making life work for me. That's what I was thinking. But I'd lost that kind of rapport, the dialogue, the rapport, and that's where this prayer came into it. And I'm not like, I don't believe in the old man with a white beard who lives in the clouds, and I don't believe in the female version of that either. When I say goddess, I'm talking about something, this could be compatible with atheism as far as I'm concerned, and placebo, and all of those kind of things. So I think the things I'm trying to draw out of that is the danger of the Superman thing, and then the importance of flow as a healing thing, and this responsiveness of actual life. There's three things there. That was a little bit of a chaotic
but good.
But,
and it actually reminds me of a few things as well that I think are super important and not really being talked about in this last year as well. And the first of, in my perception of you, Ralph, I would consider you to A, be aware, and B, be sensitive.
That's the other thing is, when I get into this hypermasculine thing, which I know, I see it on the internet a lot, all these people that when I'm talking about flow, again, this is the same, all the biohackers, the flow people, they're doing it this hyper masculine thing
Mm-hmm.
of like, yeah, just hack the shit out of nature, you know, and
Yeah.
it'll make it work for you.
Yeah.
And it's kind of lost sight of all this sensitivity. And one of the things that actually came up in my meditation was my mum saying to me, "You've always been a sensitive boy, Ralph."
Yeah.
You know, I am very, very sensitive, but because I do all of this stuff, I think, no, I'm not. I'm, you know, invulnerable, and it's yeah.
But for me, there's a super important element to this, which I don't find is being discussed enough, certainly in the circles that I'm connected into. And that is the fact that we are picking up on the current of our culture.
Oh,
So,
yeah, that was the other thing I forgot to mention. Sorry. Is that the other thing I realised is that I became addicted to the news. I was looking at the news 5 times a day, and I've never done. I've always kept abreast of global events.
yeah,
I'm not someone that sticks my head in the sand and is like, you know, blah blah blah, everything's great. But since the coronavirus hit, it's been unprecedented in my lifetime. It's been fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But for the safety of my family, I've felt like I've had to keep up with it all.
Yes.
You know, because things are happening fast.
Exactly it.
And so then I stopped reading the news every day. So what I do now, you know, I've only been doing this for like a week or something, is no news.
Yeah.
And just on the weekend, I caught up with my favourite news show. Going to shout out Majid Nawaz weekend show on LVC. I think the guy's great. I just didn't listen to all the conversation. I just listened to his little kind of synopsis of the weeks, and that's it. I'm done. And fucking hell, has that made a difference?
Yes, yeah.
Because again, I wasn't just my own stress. I was just picking up on the world is stressed, and it's like there's a medicinal level of being aware of what's going out there. You know, medicinal for yourself, but in terms of serving humanity, not being ignorant. But there's a point where medicine becomes a poison, and the news, I'd gone over that level with the news, and it was toxic for me, and it was poisoning.
Yeah.
So,
and you see, because we're picking up, we're a herd animal by design. You know, human beings are designed to live in cultures, in groups. And part of what we're doing is we're picking up on other parts of our herd being activated. And it's part of what we do within herds. And you can look into the animal world for the correlations in this as well. But if one part of the herd is alerted by a thing, other parts of the herd will be alerted. And a big indicator of that is actually through facial expressions, half of which we've taken away. So what we become is we don't know how to feel okay in the environment because we don't have enough members in the herd telling us that it's okay. And so we're all being triggered and activated, and we're feeling this cultural malaise, this cultural weather, and we don't know how to deal with it. So, you know, like yourself, there have been points where I've felt overtaken by aspects of this until I can grasp the fact that I'm coming away from something that's just about me, you know. And I regularly ask myself the question, who does this belong to? Is it actually mine, or am I picking up on something else? And, you know, one of the things that I've taught for many years with people is the fact that just because you don't have a receiver in your hands doesn't mean the signal isn't in the atmosphere. So, for instance, I don't have a radio in this room I'm in right now, but the radio waves that would allow a radio to pick up on all those programs are still in this room. And the same goes for these little devil devices here. You know, so my partner and I, we make a point of when we go out walking and we go out and do anything, those stay home, because although those signals are still in there, they're amplified through this. So what I'm doing is making sure that I'm spending enough time just in nature. I'm spending enough time just checking in. Am I really just experiencing myself, or am I picking up on what's going on around me? And as soon as I can create a classification for some of that, it gets easier, because as soon as I acknowledge, actually, they've just changed the rules, or this has happened, or that's changed, or this is going on, then again, I can reframe and bring myself back into center. And it's amazing how much we give our center away to other authorities. And it's one of the things I'm really grateful for within Life Force Qigong, the system that I practice and is taught to me by my older brother, that the idea is you hold your own center, and you choose what you do for yourself by being in your own center. And if you want to give your center away to somebody, then you give it away, but recognize you're going to respond to them, not to you. So we come back into being in our own center and being grounded in the space that we really are in. And the question that you'll see sometimes within mental health circles around anxiety is, look at the room around you and identify physical things. And within that, I always ask the question, is the threat present in the room? Because a lot of the time we're anxious about things that are conceptual, not actual. So is there a lion running down the street at me? Is there a ball of fire hurtling out the sky? Are floodwaters rising around my feet? Is there a man with a gun in my room? What is the threat that I think I'm responding to? Is it something that's conceptual, or is it real? And if it isn't real, get back into the moment, drop it. Because at this point, is there anything I can or can't do with that?
So I've been meditating, since the late 1990s, and I can get into states of meditation where there's no problem with anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking about spiritual bypassing here.
Mm-hmm.
That that is there for me to do, when I want.
Yeah.
But I can't spend my life in meditation.
No.
Because I've got a family, I've got young kids, and I don't want to. And it's difficult. So the meditating is the easy bit, but then bringing that into your day-to-day life, that's where the rubber meets the road. Yeah. And when I've talked to people about this, what I've been describing about anxiety and stuff, and say, well, surely you can just meditate, or there's a meditation that can deal with that. Well, yeah, but also no. And there's the bit, the sort of the part of your identity that is free from everything is always like that, whether you're anxious or not. So you can. I mean, this is one of the kind of funny things, is I can simultaneously be experiencing my expansive spaciousness in the moment whilst having a panic attack, and it's just because you know that enlightened mind or whatever, it doesn't mean you're not going to have panic attacks. And
absolutely.
And again, this gets back to this, panacea thing that, if you meditate, everything in your life will be sorted out. You'll never be anxious again, blah, 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 coronavirus, whatever. And it's bullshit. And then that's, I think that it's why. So I'm always been more, there's two different types of meditation. There's a sort of meditation as a relaxation technique. And then there's meditation, which is more to do with exploring the nature of consciousness and your identity and that sort of thing. And I've always been more drawn to the exploration of who I am, who we are, our consciousness and that. And the relaxation stuff's been a sort of byproduct of it. But if your path of meditation practice is more on that kind of awakening side of things, you can't expect that to stop you from feeling anxious or worried or bummed out by stuff, or, you could be, and in fact, there's been many examples of this, of people who are extremely well practiced in meditation and seated in an extremely deep part of themselves all the time, who are miserable, for most of their lives, or have extreme depression. There've been Tibetan lamas who, have had depression, but at the same time, they know that part of themselves which is not, it's beyond all of this. It's these are sort of things that I think, you learn through years of practice. There's this honeymoon period with anything where you think, right, this is it, but yeah, you get a bit more humility about it as time goes on, and you understand the mysteriousness of it all, or not to understand it, but you grok it. It becomes part of you.
And I'm very much for, I'm fully with you on that ability to be able to hold these different spaces at the same time. And similar to you, my meditation history goes back a similar length of time. And it is really important to me that we're not in denial of anything that is a problem. That there is no point, if you've got a problem going on with your body, or there's a problem going on with the environment, there is no point in denying it, because that is not necessarily going to fix it. But we can also appropriately frame things so that the language that we're using to hold something is actually reasonable and helps us, so that, okay, we can look at the existential threat of coronavirus, for example. If I step outside of my house, then I'm going to kill all the old people around me. That potential exists, but the reality of it is we're talking about a virus that doesn't affect 80% of people that catch it and has a 99.5% survival rate. Framing that changes the belief about the narrative, because it pulls into frame things that are then more appropriate around that situation. So when I'm anxious, if I can identify why I'm anxious, what I'm anxious about, it doesn't necessarily stop the anxiety, although often it will, but it allows me to be okay with the fact that I'm anxious.
Yeah,
because ultimately it's weather.
Another one of these statements that came up, this kind of goddess prayer meditation was, just don't worry about it, honey. You're not the one living. I'm you. Mother Nature. It's like Mother Nature saying, "I'm actually the one living your life." You're just the tip of the iceberg. So just don't worry about it. I do the breathing. You don't do. You don't do that stuff. And if you're feeling anxious, it's okay. I mean, for fuck's sake, I'm not. It's not so much the virus I'm worried. It's the lockdown, the measures, and all this stuff, and thinking about epigenetics and long-lasting effects through generations. I mean, God knows how the impact of this year and probably next year are going to have on our descendants.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do try and hold for myself the fact that whatever we're experiencing is just weather. It will pass. And we know that if we're going to be in a storm, we dress accordingly. And there are days when we get change, just as the weather will change. And I keep on trying to remind myself about other time frames. Bubonic plague went on for a long time. Spanish flu, when it happened at the beginning of the 20th century, 2.5 years. The two big world wars in the 20th century, they went on for years. All of these things, all of these weathers that take place are just that. The conditions around us change. We adapt to do the best that we can in the environment. Some of that adaptation won't be adequate, and some people won't make it through. Others, it will be adequate and we will make it through, and then we'll adapt into something else later. And that's all nature has done, life has done, which we are never separate from. We like to think ourselves as not part of nature, but we're as much a part of nature as anything else. It just happens to be that the anthills or the nests that we make are something else, and it will all pass, as will we. And just holding some of that to a degree allows me to calm myself, because I know I don't really have anything to fear.
I think working on this stuff on lots of different levels gives you the best chance of dealing with it. That, you know, so you're describing a kind of cognitive NLP type, you know, assessment of it, but then there is actually, you know, more embodied things you can do. So for me, it was playing my musical instrument really helped.
Yeah, agreed. Same.
You know, even though the weather's shit, just getting outside, you know, it's that connecting with friends. You know, me doing this call with you has been really helpful, because, you know, most of the time I'm talking to my kids about Minecraft. You know, it's so.
Well, that's it. Even going snowboarding. You know, we managed 3 days of snowboarding. That was like being on holiday, man. I haven't snowboarded in 12 years, and just the sensation of gliding down frozen water while looking at a mountain view, it was so invigorating and so rejuvenating. It was just incredible. And finding ways to connect with people, music, culture, the things that, again, bring richness in. What is it that actually brings vitality, richness, joy into my life as much as I can, you know, in the ways that work for me as an individual, just as you're finding the ways that work for you as an individual, and using those as the adaptations that help us to pass the time while the weather's shit. You know?
Yeah. I mean, it'd be quite a good thing to just end on is when people think of health promoting activities, they quite often think that you do something you don't enjoy just because it makes you healthy. You know, it's like you choose that food, you know, you choose your salad over that chocolate bar, you know, because the salads give you, but the chocolate bar is much nicer to eat. Or you don't really like meditating, but you force yourself to sit there. You hate going to the gym, but you're on the treadmill, you know, and it's, health doesn't have to be like that, you know. And
it shouldn't be, I would say.
It shouldn't be like that, yeah. But I think quite often people. So if I think about my own journey with strength training, when I first got into it, I was lifting weights. And I kind of enjoyed it. It was quite cool, and I never went to the gym. I always did it at home. I knew that right from the outset. But then as time went on, I moved more towards the bodyweight stuff. And now I exclusively do bodyweight training. And my body feels so much better now than it did when I was lifting weights, for example. And I enjoy it and I love it. And same with the meditation practice. When I first started meditating, honestly, I didn't enjoy it. It was boring. My body hurt, that kind of thing. But as time went on, I found the types of meditation I actually really enjoyed. And now, you know, well, for many years, actually, I love meditating. I just, you know, there's never a time really when I sit down and I'm like, oh, for God's sake, when's the timer going to go off? And I think that's where the participants, you know, it's not a lot of responsibility is for the participant to actually find the way. So you might suggest something, say, well, this is going to make you healthy, but the participant, the person that's come to see you, has to find the version of that they really enjoy, because you will. And this is where flow comes into it. It's very difficult to get into a flow state with something you don't enjoy. And also with flow, there's this sweet spot where you're working at your edge. So you're doing something you find you're quite complicated. It's not so familiar it's become automated. But it's not too difficult that you're just suddenly in your mind trying to figure it out. It's kind of, there's this sweet spot that's really enjoyable, and you feel so good when you come out of it. And for me, there's lots of things I do which promote flow, but one of them is playing my musical instrument.
Mm-hmm.
You were just describing that scene on the snowboarding on the frozen water with the beautiful sky around you and all that stuff. And there's something there when people think of spirituality and health, you can get quite puritanical about it.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know whether I might be kind of forcing this concept on that, but a kind of a hyper masculine thing, functionality, blah blah blah. And there's this more softer, more feminine approach to it, which is might be more sensual and perhaps if we were women having this conversation, we might have been over feminine about our
intuition, just feel it, trust your knowing. Yeah.
Too much chocolate and not enough salad. I don't know, but and might be say, we need a bit more masculinity. And I think that's they're very clumsy archetypes, really, this masculine, feminine type of thing. But you might think of yin and yang might be more appropriate or something. I
which are then always
definitely get a bit yang about things. Sorry?
Like yin and yang are always states of flow as well, that there's more of one, more of the other than moving around. And I think if there's anything that I really try and encourage people to understand, it is hold anything lightly and adapt it with what's actually present for you in that moment. If you're not going to get joy out of doing a thing, probably not a good choice to do it. But if you're constantly choosing the chocolate bar over the salad and your bowels are wrecked and you've got loads of inflammation and your joints hurt, you've got to ask yourself the question about, well, why are you choosing the chocolate bar? What is the joy behind that you're choosing? And is it really food that you're hungry for at that point? Or are you using it as a poor substitute for something that you're not looking beyond the obvious? So there has to be this sense of self-inquiry and awareness and intuition and feeling into a moment, along with a balance of decent, reasoned choice about why I'm doing what I'm doing. So that it's neither one nor the other. And you can't say on this day I must be this or this. It could be both, either, neither. But just allowing ourselves to adapt as the circumstances, as the weather dictates.
I think so much of this is polarity work that not trying to collapse the situation into one thing or the other. So someone could take what you've just said and say, oh, you're being all kind of like, those mystical sayings where it's like, move but don't move, and be silent whilst being noisy. It's not this kind of saying that things are bespoke and down to the individual. It's not saying, well, I've got nothing to help you with. I can't.
Sure.
It's all down to you, man. It's not that.
No.
It's you need to be given some grist. You need to be given that bit of grit that's going to go in the oyster and become the pearl. That's got to come from somebody, and that's why you would seek help.
Yeah. And that's perfectly okay as well. It's for me, it's an educational process working with people to understand what they understand about themselves and what their beliefs are and how they manage it. And there's a phrase that I jokingly use with people, but the basis of it is the way of kind of dealing with that polarity. And I eat healthy all the time, except when I don't. I do this thing 100%, except on the moments where I don't. So there's always this possibility of something else, and that in the moment where I do a thing, that's where I'm doing until I do something else. So there's always this transition, this change between one thing and another, and we're never stuck on one side or the other unless we choose to be. We can always flow from one point to another. I'm going to do Qigong until I want to do something else. I'm going to eat my salad. I'm going to eat my healthy food until I see that awesome chocolate cake that I love, and I'm going to find a balance in there, and I'm going to hold everything in a way that doesn't, the term that I take from both voice dialogue, Helen Sidra Stone's work, and from Genpo Roshi's Big Mind work, is to dissolve exclusive identification with any one thing, so that I'm not stuck on any one track.
Yeah, that's a good place to end on. So if people want to find out more about your integral health, where do they go?
So easy places to go to: bencalde.co.uk, which is my personal website, centreforintegralhealth.com, which is my clinic, and you can also find me at Benji Calde on Instagram, or Ben Calde Integral Health on Facebook, or Benji Calde on Twitter. Lots of places.
Everywhere. Cool. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me, Ben.
And thank you so much as well, Ralph. It's so beautiful to hang out, chat, connect again. Really, it's almost like no time but all time. So
yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Yeah, cool. All right, lots of love, and I will speak to you again soon. I made all the music that I use in my podcasts. If you'd like to hear more of my music, please visit SoundCloud and check out my profile, Ralph Cree.